Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. In today's video, I'm going to take a look at the potential for Double Game Week 36 and also all of the best players to be buying over the next 4 game weeks, which will wrap up the 24-25 season. Right then, so before we dive into talking about the specific players, I just wanted to do a quick update on Game Week 36 and whether or not it looks like it's going to be a double, because I've had a few questions on it. So this is being recorded after the FA Cup semi-finals have been played, so we know the results, but we haven't yet had any confirmation of the double game weeks in Game Week 36, or that fixtures will move forward, if at all, from Game Week 37. So I would recommend holding off on your transfers if you're looking at one of these 4 teams in particular until we get some sort of official announcement, because I would expect that to come at some point between Game Week 34 and Game Week 35, because otherwise it's just going to be really, really late in the day for them to be making the announcement, and it's quite harsh on fans to actually do that to them. So I would imagine that we get an announcement at some point this week. In the meantime, though, just a quick update on what it could look like. Crystal Palace, Wolves, Man City and Bournemouth could be the 4 teams doubling. There's another 2 that I'll talk about in just a moment's time in another section. Don't worry about that for now. But because Crystal Palace and Man City made it through to the FA Cup final, those 2 fixtures, so Crystal Palace at home to Wolves and Man City at home to Bournemouth, are going to be difficult to have during Game Week 37. They might need to be brought forward to Game Week 36 in the midweek, giving them a double game week for both sides and, of course, their opponents as well. So looking at these double game week fixtures on paper, if they were to go ahead, Crystal Palace, Spurs away and Wolves at home, not a bad double. Both of them are actually yellow on the ticker, but Tottenham away from home, they've just been beaten 5-1 by Liverpool. They'll have one eye on the Europa League, you'd think, as well. So that could be quite a nice fixture. Wolves at home, obviously Wolves have been in great form, but it's not a terrible fixture. Then you go over to Wolves, you've got Brighton and Crystal Palace. Again, not a bad double by any means. No really tough fixture in there. Both middling Premier League sides, upper of middle, probably in both cases right now, but not a bad fixture for a couple of their assets. Man City's probably the best looking double of Southampton. That's obviously the really nice one. And then Bournemouth after that. So again, not a bad double whatsoever. And then Bournemouth have Aston Villa and Man City. So overall, I don't think any one team here has a bad looking double per se. You'd say Man City has the strongest and therefore their assets are probably the most targetable. But a lot of us already have players like Gvardiol, Marmoush, maybe a KDB in there for a few people as well. So I won't focus too much on their assets in this video, but it goes without saying, if they do get that double game week confirmed, not only Man City, but probably all of the players from different teams of these 4 will probably be pretty appealing. A lot of us already have double or triple Crystal Palace. Some of us might have a Matias Cunha or a Clivert. Probably not an Evan Nilsson now he's just been sent off. But there should be a bit of exposure in our teams already for some of the players in these teams. Obviously, wait to hear more on the double game week announcement later this week, you would hope. But it looks likely that they'll be brought forward to game week 36 rather than pushed back into the midweek in game week 37, because there's European fixtures in that midweek. There's also the fact that game week 38 on the Sunday following is quite a tight turnaround in itself. And usually the Premier League doesn't like pushing fixtures back into the midweek before the end of the season. They usually bring them forward. That's not to say they can't do that. They could physically stay in game week 37, but let's wait and find out, because we should get an announcement in the next few days. So before moving on to the best players to be buying ahead of game week 35, I wanted to highlight another key complexity which has been added to double game week 36. Now, Spurs versus Aston Villa is currently scheduled to go ahead in game week 37. Aston Villa are out of the FA Cup, so that makes it a little bit easier to go ahead. But Spurs have officially requested their fixture be moved because of their involvement in the Europa League at this point. Now, we don't know they're going to make the final, but if they were to make the final, it would go ahead on the 21st of May, which would be a really quick turnaround between this fixture and then the Europa League final. So this fixture is currently scheduled for the Sunday, the 18th of May in game week 37. They've requested for it to be moved forward. We don't know exactly when for, but it looks very unlikely to be the Saturday in game week 37 because that's the day of the FA Cup final. And at the moment, there are no Premier League fixtures going ahead that day. So they might not want to move it into that day in the fixture schedule. And anything before that looks very likely to have to go into double game week 36. So we might get a situation where Spurs and Aston Villa double in game week 36. And if they did get a double game week in 36, it would give Aston Villa a double game week of Bournemouth away, Spurs at home, and Spurs would have a double game week of Crystal Palace at home, Aston Villa away. So that's not a bad double game week for either side. Now, Spurs might want to rotate in game week 36 to make sure that if they were in the Europa League final, they'd have players fresh and ready for it. But either way, it would add another layer of complexity to double game week 36 and, of course, take these teams out of contention for game week 37. So we don't have any confirmation on this just yet. We should probably hear more about it during the midweek between game week 34 and game week 35. And obviously, it depends on whether Spurs make it through to Europa League final anyway. So this is definitely one not to worry too much about right now. But before going ahead and selling your Aston Villa players, for instance, maybe just keep an eye out for news on this one because you might have a double game week in 36 for any Aston Villa or Spurs players that you might be holding on to. So moving on to some of the best players to buy, and I wanted to kick off by talking about a player that will be right at the top of a lot of people's watch lists and arguably even a standout captaincy option in game week 35. Bryan Mbeumo has had an unbelievably good season. He'll definitely be in the market for another Premier League side or two, maybe even in Europe as well. A lot of people will have their eyes on him. But whilst he's at Brentford, I think we should absolutely enjoy it because he's still at a relatively good price at 8 million. He gets 90 minutes per match. He rarely, if ever, gets subbed off. And the underlying attacking data is actually really, really strong. 0.59 XGI per 90 is brilliant, especially when you consider that he's one of those rare players that always plays the 90. So this data is truly representative of him as a player. And you'd expect him, therefore, in around 60% of all games to be getting an attacking return on average. The fact he's got penalties, the fact he gets some set pieces as well is a massive bonus. But even at what is already pretty high ownership at over a third of the FPL player base owning him, he's still a player that I'm definitely looking at bringing in ahead of game week 35. If you look at the fixtures to come as well, obviously we've only got 4 left. Man United at home, who will definitely have one eye on the Europa League right now, and let's face it, aren't exactly the toughest defence to be breaking down anyway right now. Followed by Ipswich, which again, now newly relegated Ipswich, one of the poorest teams in the Premier League, and other than Southampton or Leicester, probably one of the poorer sides to be in the Premier League in the last few seasons. Followed by Fulham, who aren't really fighting for too much. I mean, arguably they could get their 8th spot and European football, but that'll be a pretty closely contested game. Definitely not one of the toughest games in the league. And then Wolves away from home in game week 38. It's a good little patch of fixtures. And when you get to the back end of the season, you do find that certain players and certain teams do start to rotate. Maybe youngsters come in a little bit more. Teams that aren't really fighting for much will see players that are maybe getting subbed off a little bit earlier. I think that if there's any players out there right now that I could depend on to get 90 minutes every single match and keep producing this sort of data, Bryan Mbeumo is right at the top of that list. So for me, he's an almost lock buy for this game week, not only because I like the fixtures, but also looking around, there's a lot of pretty tight fixtures that I couldn't really call the best captaincy from. And Bryan Mbeumo at home to Man United could be a really nice fixture to be targeting as a captaincy conversation. And although a few people will go there, I still think most of the captaincy will rely on the heavy hitters like the Salah, maybe Isak, maybe a Saka or a Palmer as well. And Bryan Mbeumo at home to Man United could be a really nice differential option there. He'll be relatively well owned, but I don't know if many people will captain him. Maybe, again, I'm recording this on Sunday and the conversation just moves on during the week and everyone starts thinking about him as a captain. But right now, I feel like it will be fairly differential. I might be wrong, but it's something I've definitely got my eye on. Now, before moving on, it's very important to note that Brentford, at time of recording, and will be for quite some time during this week, still have a match to play before we get to game week 35. So there is a risk if you moved early that an Mbeumo or another Brentford asset, which we'll talk about in a moment's time, could potentially get injured in game week 34 during their Thursday evening game against Nottingham Forest. But considering his fitness and the fact he's barely missed a minute all season, I think as far as risk goes, it's fairly low. And if you wanted to catch the price rises, which for Mbeumo do feel like they're inevitable over the coming days, then I think as far as players go, he's relatively low risk to be buying early. I personally will be waiting because I can afford to do so. But if you need to go early, yes, there's a risk because you've still got that fixture to play. But for a player of his caliber who rarely gets injured, I think it's a lower risk than most. So you can't really talk about Bryan Mbeumo without talking about Yoan Whist, and they've been one of the best double acts of the season in the Premier League. And for whatever reason, I haven't actually owned Whist at all this year. I've always had one eye on him, but I've just never had the perfect moment to be buying him in. And I really regret that because he's had a phenomenal season, especially considering the price point. At under 7 million, to have a striker of this caliber putting up these numbers, that is very, very rare. And he will be a player that if he stays at Brentford over the summer, I will definitely have my eye on in game week 1 next year, especially if his price comes in anywhere near to what he is currently in FPL. Now, obviously, just like Bryan Mbeumo, he's also a player that I'm strongly considering bringing in game week 35. The fixtures are phenomenal. And Whist, although he doesn't have the penalties that Mbeumo does, his minutes this season have been almost equally as good, very, very slightly off of Mbeumo, but it's a very high standard to be holding him to. The minutes are still very strong. And the underlying attacking data is actually a shade better than Mbeumo's, especially when you look at the XG per 90, that's the expected goals. And when you actually watch Brentford, you can really see why. Brentford play in that system where Whist often now plays through the centre. They very rarely now play with 2 up top. That used to be Mbeumo next to Whist. It's much more regularly a 4-3-3 or a 3-4-3 with Whist playing centrally and Mbeumo playing on the right wing. Now, Mbeumo's data is fantastic. He's got the penalties. He's got set pieces sometimes as well. So no one's saying don't go with Mbeumo, but Whist is the one that is hoovering up the big chances in the centre of the area right now. And I think if you can cash in on a little bit of positive variance, Whist could be a nice way of going fairly differential up top for the last 4 game weeks. I think out of all of the attackers, all of the forwards, he's one of the top 2 or 3 in most models between now and the end of the season in terms of expected points. And 20 attacking returns for someone who is under 7 million is obviously going to be a relative bargain going into the back few game weeks of the season. So he's another player I've got my eye on. Whether or not I want to double up on Brentford attackers is yet to be seen. Maybe there are other players that I can look at, especially if double game weeks do come in game week 36. But if everything stayed equal, everything stayed as it is, and there weren't any double game weeks, I think Brentford attackers, it's pretty much as good as you're going to get. Man United, Ipswich, Fulham, Wolves, it's a good run. When one scores, the other tends to assist it and vice versa. So doubling up, although it maybe reduces the upside of bonus points because only one of them can get 3, the other would have to get 2 in most scenarios, the upside is still there, I think, with the fixtures on the table. And considering the price point, they're 2 players that I am heavily interested in, obviously pending double game week announcements. But even without that, they're right at the top of my list ahead of game week 35. Another striker that I've got my eye on as a player to be buying ahead of game week 35 and the run-in for the rest of the season is Matias Cunha. And what an FPL player he is, by the way. He's got 22 attacking returns in what was a relatively poor Wolves side until recently. Obviously, now they've won 6 on the bounce. They look phenomenal. But until that point, Matias Cunha was a shining light in what was a really quite struggling Premier League side. I don't think too many people doubted they'd be playing Premier League football again next year, considering the quality of the 3 promoted sides. But they weren't exactly safe from relegation until that they went on that little 6-game winning run. And Cunha has been incredibly consistent throughout the season, barring those 2 red cards that came at really unfortunate times. Even at one time that I owned him as well, that was really quite poor timing for my FPL season. But Cunha himself has been fantastic to own for the majority of the season. Now, the data actually probably doesn't really do him justice. 0.3 XG per 90 combined with close to 0.2 XA per 90. It's just a shade under 0.5, so around a return every other game week. He does tend to play 90, but he has had the odd early sub, and he has missed a few game weeks. So 22 attacking returns in a bottom half Premier League side is very, very decent for this price. And the other important thing to note with Matias Cunha is he doesn't just get goals or assists, he also has a massive chunk of bonus points to his name this season because he is so creative and so much of a talismanic figure for Wolves. Everything runs through him, and he's been able to accumulate 41 bonus points this year. That is the equivalent to something like, is it 13 assists extra, or potentially even, what is it, maybe 10 Premier League goals added onto his tally? So when you look at it, yes, it's 22 attacking returns, but it actually is more like 30 attacking returns when you take into account the amount of bonus points he's accumulated. And every time he gets an attacking return, he gets bonus points as well. So a goal isn't just worth 4 points for him. It's very regularly worth 7. And the same goes for assists as well. Not worth 3, more like 4 or 5, maybe even 6 for that first assist. So owning him has been a real pleasure when he has returned. Obviously, you've got the flip side, the disciplinary stuff, which sometimes means you get a bit unlucky with a red card here or there, but he's been incredible to own. Wolves have been in incredible form recently. Although the fixtures have been good, you'd imagine that they are able to maintain a little bit of momentum into the back 4 game weeks. And as I mentioned earlier on, there is the chance, not confirmed at time of recording, but there is a chance that they could have a double game week in 36, combining Brighton at home with Crystal Palace away, which, again, if you're Matias Cunha, you get a goal in either of those games, you could be looking at well north of 10 points in the double game week. Obviously, then he'd have to blank in game week 37. You'd probably need to bench him or look at a transfer. But as a patch of fixtures, I don't hate it. Man City away, not an easy game, and they've been better defensively, but they've been a team that are susceptible to conceding a couple of fluky goals here or there. Brighton and Crystal Palace potentially as a double, even if not, it's not bad. And then Brentford at home in game week 38. Again, not a team that I'd worry necessarily about scoring goals against. So Cunha is definitely in the mix for me as a transfer in game week 35, or more likely game week 36, considering that Man City fixture. But especially if they get the double game week, he'd be right at the top of the agenda for a lot of FPL managers. Another player who I want to talk about today is Jarrod Bowen. And unfortunately, due to the way the FA Cup semi-final results transpired, he probably won't be getting that double game week in game week 36. But I still think it's worth talking about him just based on his form and the fixtures to come. I think he is still someone that you could look at as a bit of a differential in the midfield to help you wrap up the season on a bit of a high note. Now, looking at the fixtures in particular, obviously no double game week now that Nottingham Forest have been beaten by Man City in the semi-final of the FA Cup, but each individual fixture still looks really good on the face of it. So Spurs at home in game week 35, a really quite poor defence this season, and they've still got other commitments in the Europa League semi-final, so they probably won't be that focused on their West Ham fixture in game week 35. They've got nothing to play for in the league. And then the same goes for Man United in the following game week in 36, who again might well have European commitments that they've got one eye on by this point. And even if they don't, they've not been in great form in the league all season long. So they're not a bad team to be targeting regardless. Obviously added on to the fact that they probably won't be fully focused or really even care about the fixture, considering they've got nothing to play for in the Premier League itself. Nottingham Forest is probably the one that you're not looking forward to as much, but their defensive data has kind of dropped off a cliff as of late. And because Bowen is so talismanic and so central to everything West Ham do, I would probably back them to score a goal or two against Nottingham Forest in the current situation that Forest find themselves in. That's not to say I don't think Forest won't win the game, but can I see West Ham scoring at home to Forest? Yeah, I can see it happening. And even if they don't, I think 3 out of the next 4 fixtures look fantastic for Bowen and for West Ham regardless. The team's not in great form, but Bowen's doing well. He's ticking along nicely. He's nearing 20 attacking returns this season. And at under 8 million, he's still a great differential to be picking up with good underlying data. Ipswich away from home in game week 38 will be the cherry on top. That's obviously a fantastic fixture, even better than Man United or Spurs in 35-36. So Bowen, for me, despite the fact he's not got a double game week, and that is a mark against him, of course, at this point in time, but he's got fixtures all the way between now and game week 38, which I would assume at least he's got a very good chance of getting attacking returns in. And if he can get 3 or 4 attacking returns in the last 4 game weeks, he's a good transfer regardless of double game weeks. So he's definitely on my radar as another player in midfield that I'd be looking at. Okay, so given my earlier chat about the potential for Spurs Aston Villa to be brought forward to game week 36 and therefore giving them a double game week, Aston Villa options are still on the table as players that you might want in your FPL sides. Now, a lot of us have leftover players from prior to game week 34 because they had the double game week, of course, and Southampton before that. So you might already have 1 or 2 assets floating around. One of those assets might well be Marcus Rashford, who unfortunately couldn't play in the FA Cup semi-final. And after the game, Emery came out and said he's basically pulled up with a hamstring injury in training. And it could be some time that he misses out before coming back into the squad. If that is the case, then I would advise looking at Ollie Watkins pretty closely as an option in your FPL side between now and the end of the season. It looks like Rashford's out for a while. If he's out for the next 4 game weeks all the way through to the end of the season, Ollie Watkins has no competition at centre forward for his position, and Aston Villa are now out of all other competitions as well. So the reasons previously as to why Watkins wasn't getting the minutes to making a good FPL asset, or at least a reliable one, were all down to the fact that he had competition for places, whether that was John Duran earlier on in the season or Marcus Rashford more recently, taking minutes off of him. And because they were in other competitions, they needed to rotate a bit as well. Watkins now has 4 games between now and the end of the season where you'd imagine he is nailed into the starting spot in centre forward and probably has no real competition to be taking minutes off of him. The underlying data for when he's actually on the pitch has still been fantastic. He's still bagged 15 goals this season, as well as 7 assists. And the XG per 90 is absolutely fantastic still. 0.57 is brilliant for a player, even at his price, at just shy of 9 million. That's still very, very good. The only mark against him is the fact that he doesn't have penalties. And even if he did get given penalties, he's actually got a pretty rubbish record as well. So I'd almost hope that he doesn't get penalties because you can just see him missing one. So for me, I still think he's a great option. He should be getting 80 plus minutes in all of these fixtures between now and the end of the season, as long as Rashford is indeed out. And it does look like he will be. Hamstring injuries do usually take a little bit of time to get back from. And given that there's no real other centre forwards vying for his spot, I think he's a very good bet between now and the end of the season. And obviously, you've got the potential for that double game week in game week 36. Not confirmed yet, but if Tottenham make it to the Europa League final, which again is still up in the air right now, but if they did, it looks like they're pushing quite hard to get their fixture brought forward to game week 36. So keep an eye on it. Maybe not one to commit to right this second, but Ollie Watkins' fixtures between now and the end of the season, regardless, are looking pretty good. Fulham at home, Bournemouth away, probably the 2 more difficult fixtures, followed by Spurs and Man United, who obviously we've already talked about earlier on in the video. Neither of them are any good defensively. And even if they are out of Europe by that point, they're still a team that I would say are worth targeting in both cases. So Watkins and Villa assets more generally will be appealing to us between now and the end of the season, especially if they get that double game week confirmed in game week 36. Now, as we reach the end of today's video, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I'm just shy of 3,500. It would be great to get there by the end of the season. And thank you so much for all of your support this season so far. If there are any players, and I'm sure there are plenty, that I haven't talked about today that you're looking at ahead of game week 35, do let me know in the comments below and I'll try and get back to you before the game week 35 deadline. In the meantime, I hope you're all having a great game week 34. It's not quite done yet. We've still got the Thursday evening fixture to go, but I hope you're having a good one so far. And I'll see you later on in this week as I start looking at my transfer plans ahead of game week 35.